Hi guys, welcome to Book 3, Part 3 of The Law of One Raw Material. And really quick, I just want to answer some questions about the harvest that we're in as we move from 3D to 4D. A lot of people have concerns that we're not making it, like we're not orientating positive into the fourth density. And I just want to put everyone at ease that we have graduated to fourth density positive. And I want to kind of explain a little bit about why it doesn't seem that way, because the world is kind of going through some turmoil. And I want to kind of explain why it feels like that. And as an empath, I can tell you, I felt a lot of everything that was going on this past year. But where we are right now, I like to give the analogy of playing the game of chess. So when you play chess, there's a moment in the game where you've got them. You've won. You've got them in 6 moves. And only you know this. But there's a moment in the game where you exchange a look with your opponent. And they see the 6 moves as well. But they don't concede to the game. When that happens, you're supposed to tip over your king and concede to the game. The game's over. But what's happening right now is that they did not do that. They're not doing that. They're continually forced to play the game even though they know they lost, hoping the other person makes a mistake and they can then win. But that's not going to happen. So they keep playing. But then things change. It's like the first row of the audience all of a sudden sees the 6 moves. And then the second row of the audience kind of sees it. And that's kind of where we are. Now, what happens is the person can, instead of just tipping over their king, they'll just flip the whole board over and they are going to turn over every chair and every table on their way out. And that's kind of what we're dealing with. They are going for broke. They want to cause as much turmoil and damage on their last incarnation here on Earth. All the negative entities are really going to take as many as they can with them. Is kind of where we are. But remember, we have won. We have graduated positively orientated to the new Earth. And a lot of people talk about this, but it's hard to get any proof. And it's hard to feel like that when we're in the middle of it like now. But Ra also says that it takes anywhere from 100 to 700 years to complete the transition. It's not just a switch that goes off. It's a bleed. And I've also heard in another channeling session, the way it's described, when we talk about the harvest, just like when you harvest anything, and I'm just going to say, I actually don't like that term. I prefer graduate, when you graduate to the next density instead of harvest. It just sounds better. But anyway, so when you harvest something like rice, you have a big, bin of rice. And when you first harvest it, there's a lot of junk still in there. There's little bits of dirt, rocks, twigs, all kinds of stuff. And it takes a while until you can clean that up so you can have this nice, pristine harvest of rice or whatever you're harvesting. And that's what we need to go through. Bit by bit, we need to make a pristine harvest. And it takes a while. So I just kind of want to lay that out, to give people a little bit ease of mind that we are in positively orientated planet, even though it doesn't seem that way. Don't worry, we're going to get there bit by bit. We just kind of have to go through them flipping over every table on their way out. Okay, so before we get into this next session, I just want to let you guys know that I am, for one, using a different voice to do these sessions. I like this new voice a lot, and I hope you guys do too. And I am going to start omitting everything when they talk about Carla and how she's doing. Carla is the person that's channeling, and she's doing a very specific type of channeling. It's the kind of channeling where she is completely out of her body. And I mean completely. She is not aware about anything that's going on. Because there's other channelers there that kind of just ride, shotgun or back seat when they're doing channeling. So they're still moving around. They're still there. That is not what Carla is doing. She's completely out. And they refer to her always as the instrument because she is completely out of her body, and Ra is coming in and literally playing her body like an instrument, like playing her vocal cords as an instrument to send a message. So they always refer to her as the instrument. And they always say, how is the instrument? And it's very repetitive. It is taking up a lot of the sessions, just going over, for back hurts and things like that. So I'm just going to start omitting all of that because it doesn't really pertain to the law of one. And that's what we all want to get into. So in this next session, we get into the Rhine group a little bit about polarization. And I just want to say that Ra does go over the material of how you really do need to be an absolute almost totality of negatively orientated. That means every single decision you make, every single move you make in this life is always going to be service to self. You don't do anything for anybody else, even though it might seem that way. You're planning to get more out of it in the end. And they do a lot of things to try to get more and more gravitational pull towards negative. And they'll do other things like enslaving others. Usually, by they call it sexual magic. And you can kind of hear about this stuff, like cults that are trying to be negatively polarized. They do use sex as part of an enslavement tool because you can really draw someone else's energy through that act. Like rape, it is very draining of energy from someone else in order to take it into yourself. So Ra goes over that a little bit. And then in the next session, we really dive deep into the pyramids again. It's always a lot of fun. I'll give you a cross section of the pyramid so you can kind of follow along to what Ra is saying, and I'll give a little synapse at the end. But let's get right into it. Here is session 3 of book 3, The Law of One Raw Material.
The Law of One, Book 3, Session 55, June 5th, 1981. Ra, I am Ra. I greet you in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. I communicate now. Questioner, I want to ask a couple questions about previous material that I didn't understand. I am hoping that this will clear up my understanding somewhat with respect to the mental configurations with which we have been dealing. In the session before last you stated, however, this is a risk for the Orion entities due to the frequency with which the harvestable negative planetary entities attempt to bid and order the Orion contact just as these entities bid planetary negative contacts. Can you explain the mechanisms that affect polarization in consciousness with respect to this statement? Ra, I am Ra. The negative polarization is greatly aided by the subjugation or enslavement of other selves. The potential between two negatively polarized entities is such that the entity which enslaves the other or bids the other gains, in negative polarity. The entity so bidden or enslaved, in serving an other self, will necessarily lose negative polarity, although it will gain in desire for further negative polarization. This desire will then tend to create opportunities to regain negative polarity. Questioner, am I to understand then that just the fact that the third density entity calls or bids an Orion Crusader is a polarizing type of action that affects both entities? Ra, I am Ra. This is incorrect. The calling mechanism is not congruent in the slightest degree with the bidding mechanism. In the calling, the entity which calls is a suppliant neophyte asking for aid in negative understanding, if you may excuse this misnomer. The Orion response increases its negative polarity as it is disseminating the negative philosophy, thereby enslaving or bidding the entity calling. There are instances, however, when the contact becomes contest, which is prototypical of negativity. In this contest, the caller will attempt, not to ask for aid, but to demand results. Since the third density, negatively oriented harvestable entity has at its disposal an incarnative experiential nexus, and since Orion Crusaders are, in a great extent, bound by the first distortion in order to progress, the Orion entity is vulnerable to such bidding if properly done. In this case, the third density entity becomes master and the Orion Crusader becomes entrapped and can be bid. This is rare. However, when it has occurred, the Orion entity or social memory complex involved has experienced loss of negative polarity, in proportion to the strength of the bidding third density entity. Questioner, you mentioned that this will work when the bidding is properly done. What did you mean by, when the bidding is properly done? Ra, I am Ra. To properly bid is to be properly negative. The percentage of thought and behavior involving service to self must approach 99%. in order for a third density negative entity to be properly configured for such a contest of bidding. Questioner, what method of communication with the Orion entity would a bidder of this type use? Ra, I am Ra. The two most usual types of bidding are 1. The use of perversions of sexual magic, 2. The use of perversions of ritual magic. In each case, the key to success is the purity of the will of the bidder. The concentration upon victory over the servant must be nearly perfect. Questioner, can you tell me, in the polarizations in consciousness, if there is any analogy with respect to what you just said in this type of contact with respect to what we are doing right now in communicating with Ra? Ra, I am Ra. There is no relationship between this type of contact and the bidding process. This contact may be characterized as one typical of the brothers and sisters of sorrow, wherein those receiving the contact have attempted to prepare for such contact by sacrificing extraneous, self-oriented distortions in order to be of service. The Ra social memory complex offers itself also as a function of its desire to serve. Both the caller and the contact are filled with gratitude at the opportunity of serving others. We may note that this in no way presupposes that either the callers or those of our group in any way approach a perfection or purity such as was described in the bidding process. The calling group may have many distortions and the working with much catalyst, as may those of Ra. The overriding desire to serve others, bonded with the unique harmonics of this group's vibratory complexes, gives us the opportunity to serve as one channel for the one infinite creator. Things come not to those positively oriented but through such beings. Questioner, thank you. You have stated in an earlier session that, until transfers of energy of all types have been experienced and mastered to a great extent, there will be blockages in the blue and in the indigo radiations. Could you explain that more fully? Ra, I am Ra. At this spacetime we have not covered the appropriate intermediate material. Please request Ion at a more appropriate spacetime nexus. Questioner, I'm sort of hunting around here for an entry into some information. I may not be looking in a productive area. You had stated that as we, Ra, had been aided by shapes such as the pyramid, so we could aid your people. These shapes have been mentioned many, many times, and you have also stated that the shapes themselves aren't of too much consequence. I see a relation between these shapes and the energies that we have been studying with respect to the body, and I would like to ask a few questions on the pyramids to see if we might get an entry into some of this understanding. You stated, you will find the intersection of the triangle, which is at the first level on each of the four sides, forms a diamond in a plane, which is horizontal. Can you tell me what you meant by the word intersection? Ra, I am Ra. Your mathematics and arithmetic have a paucity of configurative descriptions, which we might use. Without intending to be obscure, we may note that the purpose of the shapes is to work with time-space portions of the mind-body-spirit complex. Therefore, the intersection is both spacetime and time-space oriented and thus is expressed in three-dimensional geometry, by two intersections which, when projected in both time-space and spacetime, form one point. Questioner, I have calculated this point to be 1/6 of the height of the triangle that forms the side of the pyramid. Is this correct? Ra, I am Ra. Your calculations are substantially correct and we are pleased at your perspicacity. Questioner, this would indicate to me that in the Great Pyramid at Giza, the Queen's Chamber, as it is called, would be the chamber used for initiation. Is this correct? Ra, I am Ra. Again, you penetrate the outer teaching. The Queen's Chamber would not be appropriate or useful for healing work, as that work involves the use of energy in a more synergic configuration, rather than the configuration of the centered being. Questioner, then would the healing work be done in the King's Chamber? Ra, I am Ra. This is correct. We may note that such terminology is not our own. Questioner, yes, I understand that. It is just that it is the common naming of the two chambers of the Great Pyramid. I don't know whether this line of questioning is going to take me to a better understanding of the energies, but until I have explored the concepts there is nothing much that I can do but to ask a few questions. There is a chamber below the bottom level of the pyramid, down below ground, that appears to be roughly in line with the King's Chamber. What is that chamber? Ra, I am Ra. We may say that there is information to be gained from this line of querying. The chamber you request to be informed about is a resonating chamber. The bottom of such a structure, in order to cause the appropriate distortions for healing catalyst, shall be open. Questioner, the book, The Life Force of the Great Pyramid, has related the Ankh shape with a resonance in the pyramid. Is this a correct analysis? Ra, I am Ra. We have scanned your mind and find the phrase, working with crayons. This would be applicable. There is only one significance to these shapes such as the crux and sada, that is the placing in coded form of mathematical relationships. Questioner, is the 76 degrees and 18-foot angle at the apex of the pyramid a critical angle? Ra, I am Ra. For the healing work intended, this angle is appropriate. Questioner, why does the king's chamber have the various small chambers above it? Ra, I am Ra. This will be the last full query of this working. We must address this query more generally in order to explicate your specific question. The positioning of the entity to be healed is such that the life energies, if you will, are in a position to be briefly interrupted or intersected by light. This light then may, by the catalyst of the healer with the crystal, manipulate the oral forces, as you may call the various energy centers, in such a way that if the entity to be healed wills it so, corrections may take place. Then the entity is re-protected by its own, now less distorted, energy field and is able to go its way. The process by which this is done involves bringing the entity to be healed to an equilibrium. This involves temperature, barometric pressure, and the electrical charged atmosphere. The first two requirements are controlled by the system of chimneys. Questioner, does this healing work by affecting the energy centers in such a way that they are unblocked so as to perfect the 7 bodies that they generate and, therefore, bring the entity to be healed into proper balance? Ra, I am Ra. This entity tires. We must answer in brief and state simply that the distorted configuration of the energy centers is intended to be temporarily interrupted and the opportunity is then presented to the one to be healed to grasp the baton, to take the balanced route and to walk thence with the distortions towards disease of mind, body, and spirit greatly lessened. The catalytic effect of the charged atmosphere and the crystal directed by the healer must be taken into consideration as integral portions of this process. For the bringing back of the entity to a configuration of conscious awareness would not be accomplished after the reorganization possibilities are offered without the healer's presence and directed will. I now leave this working. I am Ra. I leave you, my friends, in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth, then, rejoicing in the power and in the peace of the one infinite Creator. Adonai. The Law of One, Book 3, Session 56, June 8, 1981. Ra, I am Ra. I greet you in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. We communicate now. I will ask, how does the pyramid shape work? Ra, I am Ra. We are assuming that you wish to know the principle of the shapes, angles, and intersections of the pyramid at what you call Giza. In reality, the pyramid shape does no work. It does not work. It is an arrangement for the centralization as well as the diffraction of the spiraling upward light energy, as it is being used by the mind-body-spirit complex. The spiraling nature of light is such that the magnetic fields of an individual are affected by spiraling energy. Certain shapes offer an echo chamber, shall we say, or an intensifier for spiraling prana, as some have called this all-present, primal distortion of the one infinite Creator. If the intent is to intensify the necessity for the entity's own will to call forth the inner light in order to match the intensification of the spiraling light energy, the entity will be placed in what you have called the Queen's Chamber position in this particular shaped object. This is the initiatory place and is the place of resurrection. The offset place, representing the spiral as it is in motion, is the appropriate position for one to be healed, as in this position an entity's vibratory magnetic nexi are interrupted in their normal flux. Thus a possibility-probability vortex ensues, a new beginning, shall we say, is offered for the entity in which the entity may choose a less distorted, weak, or blocked configuration of energy center magnetic distortions. The function of the healer and crystal may not be overemphasized, for this power of interruption must needs be controlled, shall we say, with incarnate intelligence, the intelligence being that of one which recognizes energy patterns which, without judging, recognizes blockage, weakness, and other distortion, and which is capable of visualizing, through the regularity of self and of crystal, the less distorted other self to be healed. Other shapes which are arched, groined, vaulted, conical, or as your teepees are also shapes with this type of intensification of spiraling light. Your caves, being rounded, are places of power due to this shaping. It is to be noted that these shapes are dangerous. We are quite pleased to have the opportunity to enlarge upon the subject of shapes such as the pyramid, for we wish, as part of our honor duty, to state that there are many wrong uses for these curved shapes, for with improper placement, improper intentions, or lack of the crystallized being functioning as channel for healing, the sensitive entity will be distorted more rather than less, in some cases. It is to be noted that your peoples build, for the most part, the cornered or square habitations, for they do not concentrate power. It is further to be noted that the spiritual seeker has, for many of your time periods of years, sought the rounded, arched, and peaked forms as an expression of the power of the Creator. Questioner, is there an apex angle that is the angle for maximum efficiency in the pyramid? Ra, I am Ra. Again, to conserve this instrument's energy, I am assuming that you intend to indicate the most appropriate angle of apex for healing work. If the shape is such that it is large enough to contain an individual mind-body-spirit complex at the appropriate offset position, within it, the 76 degrees 18 minutes, approximate, angle is useful and appropriate. If the position varies, the angle may vary. Further, if the healer has the ability to perceive distortions with enough discrimination, the position within any pyramid shape may be moved about until results are affected. However, we found this particular angle to be useful. Other social memory complexes, or portions thereof, have determined different apex angles for different uses, not having to do with healing but with learning. When one works with the cone, or shall we say, the silo type of shape, the energy for healing may be found to be in a general circular pattern unique to each shape as a function of its particular height and width, and in the cone shape, the angle of apex. In these cases, there are no corner angles. Thus the spiraling energy works in circular motion. Questioner, I will make a statement which you can correct. I intuitively see the spiraling energy of the Giza pyramid being spread out as it moves through the so-called king's chamber, and refocusing in the so-called queen's chamber. I am guessing that the spread of energy in the so-called king's chamber is seen in the spectrum of colors, red through violet, and that the energy centers of the entity to be healed should be aligned with this spread of the spectrum so that the spectrum matches his various energy centers. Will you correct this statement? Ra, I am Ra. We can correct this statement. Questioner, will you please do that? Ra, the spiraling energy is beginning to be diffused at the point where it goes through the king's chamber position. However, although the spirals continue to intersect, closing and opening in double spiral fashion through the apex angle, the diffusion or strength of the spiraling energies, red through violet color values, lessens if we speak of strength, and gains if we speak of diffusion, until at the peak of the pyramid you have a very weak color resolution useful for healing purposes. Thus the king's chamber position is chosen as the first spiral after the centered beginning through the queen's chamber position. You may visualize the diffusion angle as the opposite of the pyramid angle, but the angle being less wide than the apex angle of the pyramid, being somewhere between 33 and 54 degrees, depending upon the various rhythms of the planet itself. Questioner, then I assume that if I start my angle at the bottom of the queen's chamber and make a 33 to 54 degrees angle, from that point, so that half of that angle falls on the side of the center line that the king's chamber is on, that will indicate the diffusion of the spectrum. Starting from the point at the bottom of the queen's chamber, let's say, if we were using a 40 degrees angle, we would have a 20 degrees diffusion to the left of the center line, passing through the king's chamber. Is that correct? Ra, I am Ra. This will be the last full question of this session. It is correct that half of the aforementioned angle passes through the king's chamber position. It is incorrect to assume that the queen's chamber is the foundation of the angle. The angle will begin somewhere between the queen's chamber position and thence downward towards the level of the resonating chamber, offset for the healing work. This variation is dependent upon various magnetic fluxes of the planet. The King's chamber position is designed to intersect the strongest spiral of the energy flow regardless of where the angle begins. However, as it passes through the Queen's chamber position, this spiraling energy is always centered and at its strongest point. I am Ra. I leave you in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and in the peace of the one infinite Creator. Adonai.
So that was a lot of information about how the pyramids work, and Ra is really trying to get all the information across about the significance of the shape of the pyramids, where are the chambers, but he's not really getting into the activation and how they did it during the time of the pyramids. He mentions a little bit about the crystals and also the chakra centers in our body when we're in the King's chamber and how you go through them. Now, I know from other works, particularly the Lemurians, and how their healing temples worked, because you needed to use crystals to match up with every chakra system. And you also need someone to apply the proper consciousness for the crystal, for that chakra system, and work your way up in the swirling energy. And Ra mentions almost like up a silo to heal. Like if you have to heal any part of the body, say the throat chakra, you can't just jump into the throat chakra and just heal it. You really need to start with the red ray energy center and work your way up in a nice spiraling energy flow. And that's basically what the shape of the pyramids are using. They're getting into, you need all facets to work together. You need to have sensory deprivation. You need to have a good airflow, and you need to have the crystals, and you need to have a person, someone there with the consciousness applied to activate everything together. You can't just sit in a pyramid that you built yourself and expect to get any kind of healing. And I did find it interesting when I was working with information from the Lemurians about how each chakra system worked with different parts of the body. And it started with the red ray, and the red ray doesn't just hold that place in that specific energy of the body, but the red ray did work with like the dense parts of your body, like your bones and the really dense tissues. And then you would work your way up into the orange ray, which was more for your sexual organs. And of course, you get your solar plexus, and you get your breathing and your lungs. And of course, the orange or the green ray is like your heart. Anyway, so it's not just the energy centers that were in the placement of the body. If you're going to do healing work with the chakra system and with crystals and with consciousness, each energy center and each chakra will control different parts of the body and systems within the body. And that's where the crystal energy to activate and where the consciousness applied to all of it need to all work together. And Ra was trying to get that across. It'll get a little better in the future sessions when trying to really work with the pyramids. So we'll get into more detail in the future sessions. So I will see you in the next video when we do part 4. Thanks for listening, guys.